What's going on, guys? A quick cold open. Well, my initial plan for Jordan Sperber was to pretty much go through his pregame, in-game, post-game process. Time limits made that impossible, which is funny considering how long this is. It's a marathon, but I thought it was all very worthwhile. But what made it impossible was two choices I made, which could be thought of as my own self-interest. Number one was having him on for the second time, considering the first was strictly a UVA preview, was really getting to know him and find out more about his career and just having a conversation because I feel like he's doing an amazing job right now with the analytics and X's and O's. And I always like getting to know someone who I think is doing quality work on a human level. It's not like we were having a heart to heart or anything, but just kind of his perspective on analytics, how we got into it, and just kind of just some questions that might be a little bit different, stuff like that. So number two was with college basketball coverage the way it is currently. I really wanted to get his thoughts as someone who's done an amazing job carving his own lane in the industry, especially in my opinion with the X's and O's, along with just the versatility of being able to be a Swiss Army knife and do whatever else. So, while we did get into how he'd view UNC pregame if he was going into Duke UNC. We didn't quite get as much in-game and post-game as I had planned, but I think we still got a whole bunch of insight into his mind, the way he views numbers. And if I am lucky enough to have him on again, I will definitely ask more about kind of the way he sees things in game and then post game, the way he evaluates everything. But this is a Duke podcast, so we did, after the UNC kind of pregame stuff, it was a lot of Duke just overall this season, maybe how a little, and how obviously with Zion going down, how that might be affected. I'm putting this out now Friday, early afternoon, so we know Zion, the injury isn't as severe as some may have thought, so that's great news if he chooses to come back. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great stuff after the Duke. We got into the college basketball coverage, and yeah, I've had some frustrations which really are impossible to vocalize on Twitter because anything on Twitter is just tough to use with the proper context because context isn't really popular on Twitter. And yeah, and just someone who kind of thinks the same way, obviously analyzing the game, the how, why. I was really interested into his thoughts of why isn't there more? How can we get more? What are the issues with the way it currently is? Just everything. And I thought his responses were really interesting. I thought this whole thing was really interesting. I really liked having Jordan. I've cut down on my guests a lot over the years because I think there's only so much someone can tell me at this point if they don't actually analyze the game. So Jordan is someone obviously I've had on twice. I want to have on more. Awesome dude, awesome analyst. Hope you enjoy. What's going on, guys? It's Adam Comero here. Welcome to another episode of the Duke Basketball Corner podcast. And we are coming off what should have been, win or lose, a memorable game, first rivalry game of the year against Carolina. And it was marred very quickly. I mean, the tickets were going for insane amounts of money. Obama was there. A lot of famous people were there. 36 seconds in, I believe, Zion Williamson busted through his shoe, slipped, and his knee is sprained. Coach K said after the game, it's a mild knee sprain, but really besides that, there's no timetable. We're just waiting on news, any speculation. I know there's many professional doctors all of a sudden on Twitter, but I think it's probably best to wait for an MRI and see what's going on there. Hopefully he'll be back. I mean, in terms of now everyone's into the kind of the one and done conversation, all that stuff is back in the forefront. You know what? I just hope his health gets better. That's the most important thing. So we will talk about that game. That will be included in this podcast. But since I know Zion getting hurt and Duke losing, I think a lot of people just kind of want to put it in the back of their heads for now. So I wanted to make something a little more lasting for non-Duke fans as well. And that's why I have Jordan Sperber here. I brought him on for just basically to see what he did regularly for games, to review this North Carolina Duke game, to see how he prepared. I didn't expect the Zion thing, so it was a little bit different. But I think it's going to be really cool anyway, because I'm just kind of going to pick his brain and see how this analytics thing goes. I know some analytics, but I am not near what Jordan is. Jordan was here for a podcast a couple weeks ago for Virginia, where I somehow managed to say that Duke beat Virginia last year. That was my bad. Virginia absolutely beat Duke last year, but hey, Duke has beat them twice this year. So Jordan, thanks so much for joining me. And again, you can find his analysis, stat graphics, short videos, links to longer video analysis on YouTube, along with his weekly newsletter, or is on Twitter. That's where all the links will be. And let's start off, Jordan. I hate that you have to keep retelling your history because I listen to a bunch of your pods, and it seems like every time, but it does help provide some context for those who haven't heard your podcast or you guesting on others. So can you give us a little history of your career and how you've dealt with analytics in terms of working for teams and now kind of in the media?
Yeah, so thank you for having me again, Adam. I'm I'm excited to do it. And yeah, you said that you have to repeat it, but I mean the easiest thing to do is talk about yourself, right? So it's not too bad. I started my Twitter account and my website in high school, and slowly, very slowly, but I guess surely built up a little bit of a following. Um, and not pretty modest, but one of the cool things was, and I still see it today, is in the college basketball world, people are looking at Twitter, they're looking at podcasts, they're looking at everything, and so even in high school and in college, I had some college coaches reach out to me, mostly about analytics stuff that I was doing. I was also doing X's and O's stuff. It's always kind of been combining the two for me, but at that point in time, I could probably provide more value to a college program through the analytics stuff, just not really having formal X's and O's experience beyond just being like a nerdy basketball kid. And so, yeah, I ended up getting hired by Eric Musselman at Nevada, and I worked a year for him and 2 years at New Mexico State for Paul Weir and Chris Jans. And after that experience, over the years, I think I've gotten better at the analytics stuff, but I've especially gotten kind of like more into the behind the scenes of the college basketball world. And so having that perspective a little bit, having worked for 3 years, so it's combining the analytics, it's combining the video or the X's and O's, and then also that like insider stuff.
Yeah, I think the versatility is what I most appreciate because analytics, I mean, we live in a world of extremes. It's either loving the numbers or saying, no, I just want to watch the games. It can't be actually middle ground because nothing's middle ground. So I really like that you do that. You add a lot of human element to it. If some people, they'll just list a bunch of numbers and expect others to be like, oh, okay, I'll know how to apply that. Not everyone does. Not everyone has interest. So if you apply that in a real human way and show the basketball way it affects the numbers have an effect on, I think that really helps, and you do that really well. I especially love the X's and O's. How long has the has the Solving Basketball podcast actually been going?
So, say that again. Sorry, you broke up for a second. How's the podcast been going?
How long has it been going? The length of time?
Yes. So I think that the launch date was October 1st. we started out with a bang with Ken Pomeroy. So I got the opportunity to meet Ken a couple of times when we played at Utah Valley. Also one year at the Final Four, but I went on to New Mexico State. We played Utah Valley in Orem once a year, and that's not too far from Ken. And so I couldn't decide if I wanted to start off and work through the kinks with Ken, an episode I knew that a lot of people would watch or would listen, and even now probably go back if they discover the podcast. That's probably the second episode that they listen to. Then is the Ken Pomeroy one. But yeah, so October 1st, I think we're 21 or 22 episodes now. Have not missed a Monday, which I am proud of. And yeah, it's been an experience.
So we're 5 months in. Have you solved basketball yet?
That is.
I mean, it's been enough time, man. I'm not a patient guy.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. I kind of explained the name in the first episode.
It's a yes or no question, Jordan. Have you solved basketball yet?
Okay, no.
Oh, that's a disappointment. Okay, so I mean, social media stuff blowing up, that like off random whatever, is something I still have a hard time grasping. I mean, I'm afraid to attend Wizards games, Orioles games. And I used to have season tickets to the Redskins. I'd always be known as the always depressed guy if I actually was there, because who knows when they're going to film you. You attended Villanova, and you were at Nevada during Eric Musselman. Well, Eric Musselman is obviously still there. So were you there for the crying piccolo girl at Villanova, or Eric Musselman's daughter, who basically was acted like a born star during a tournament game interview? Those are two pretty memorable kind of social media blowups, and I know you did attend Villanova and obviously worked under Musselman. So were you live for those?
Those are both great questions. I know exactly what you're talking about with the crying piccolo girl. I think that was after the NC State loss in the second round, and that might have been my first year after graduating. I'm pretty sure I was actually coaching an AAU team that year, and we had a game that overlapped with that game, and I missed the second half. I remember that. So I did go to Villanova. I played on the club team, on the club basketball team there, and I'm still a Villanova fan. I think it's hard to work in the industry for 3 years and then still be like a diehard fan. I just kind of have a different lens, and I put so much myself and just the staff in general, our staff, into those seasons in those 3 years, that when you don't have that skin in the game, even though I am an alum, it's kind of difficult to really live and die by it to the extent that maybe like a Duke fan does.
It is. I mean, it still boggles my mind how it's just, if a coach hasn't done it yet, they can't do it. And before Villanova won it all, it was just Jay Wright can't do it. I mean, stuff like that. Now it's Tony Bennett and Scott Drew can't make a Final Four. It's just nonstop. When they do, then people will move on to the next guy and saying he can't. But anyway. All right, so let's start out with the most original, innovative question, which I'm definitely not stealing from your Solving Basketball podcast. All right, it's possible you've answered this already. Since I actually didn't listen to the first couple episodes, I've listened to like the last 8 or something, but not the first couple. But so, Jordan, if you were shooting free throws alone in a gym, or just me rebounding, maybe with a little bit of heckling going on, how many would you make out of 100?
Yeah, so it is this is for the listeners that don't know, this is the first question that I ask every guest, and the idea came from that I was going to be having a lot of varying basketball people, some that played at a really high level, some just that like to do basketball analytics, and so it'd be a little continuity between the episodes, and that was the idea. There is an episode early on where I kind of give my answer, but what I said in that episode is I wouldn't be asking the question if I wasn't a good throw shooter. It kind of is what it is. So I probably wouldn't be focused on that if I wasn't at least decent. But I do think that people tend to overestimate their answers just because, especially we don't really talk much about the context behind it. But if you don't get to warm up, if we just walked into a gym, I'll say I would probably go low 80s. Sometimes I get on people not giving a specific number, but to take it as literally as possible, if we walked into a gym right now, you went under the hoop, I went to the foul line, about 100 in a row without warming up, I would say that I would make 81.
Not too shabby, not too shabby. All right, so what coach who has not been on your podcast would you most like to have as a guest? You could pick their brain.
Tony Bennett would be my number one.
That was a quick answer.
Yeah. Well, I have a list.
I know you were talking with oh shoot, I'm going to forget the name. Let me quickly look with Gibson Piper, about how you had a coach's draft. Now, remember you saying that you had drafted Tony Bennett first.
Yeah. So I think that. Yeah, I don't know. I guess the reason why I answered it so quickly is that, to me, the Virginia system, the reason why I've done so much Virginia coverage is first and foremost that they're really, really good this year. But the system is very unique, and he is so good at coaching to his system that it makes for really easy breakdowns. So you always know what Virginia is running, or you almost always know what Virginia is running and trying to accomplish on the court, because they're so good at the execution side of things. And so what I would want to talk to Tony Bennett about, we do have like a list of people that we want to try to get on, and I don't necessarily have Tony Bennett on there. Maybe that's something that we should aspire to be able to get with some recognition, if I guess get some kind of recognition where that is possible. But we do want to get a Virginia staffer.
Do you just stick to college?
So it would no. The answer is usually, but obviously Brad Stevens being sort of like the analytics pioneer would be an interesting guest to have regardless, and he has the college ties too. But I guess I would say if any NBA coach reached out to me and said they wanted to be on the podcast, I would say yes. So right. So there you go.
All right, what player, current or ex? Okay, I'm gonna say I have bias in terms of who I think you should pick. And you know what? I don't even think it's biased. I think it's a very rational opinion. Think about. I should just let you go.
No. I wanna hear yours first.
Well, it's not even mine. It's just who I think would. Okay, I mean Duke analytics, basically playing defense. I don't think anybody really kind of. I don't want to say popularized because I'm not sure how mainstream exactly it is, but I mean, he was famous for just the way he described how he prepared to guard Kobe Bryant and the amount of research he did. There is one player that really brought that sort of analytics to the forefront more than anyone else who I've heard as a player.
Shane Battier.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good call. Yeah, I think that sometimes it doesn't make the players if you're talking about analytics with the player, it doesn't make for the strongest episodes necessarily. And Shane Battier would definitely be an exception to that. It'd be super interesting. But really, the key, like I had one of the former players when I was at Nevada, Leland King, on, and we talked about actually Leland. He's someone I got fairly close with while I was at Nevada, and he will message me sometimes just a random analytics thought that he has, and so we could have gone that way with the episode. I think maybe we should at some point, but He had transferred twice in his career, and so that's what we talked about. We talked about from the player side of things, transfers in college basketball. So Shane Battier I agree with you. He would probably be the best one for an analytic episode, but depending on who you're talking to, it's trying to find the best topic, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's also because like Shane, he really likes talking about it. It's different than like some you'll know some like really famous coaches. They won't say anything though. That's why like the Lebitard show, I listen to that. He refuses to ever have coaches for any sport because they just don't, and quarterbacks too, because they just don't say anything. So yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of you want them to really be conversational about it. And from what I've heard, Shane is absolutely that. So I'd love to hear him, but I think just any current or ex-player would be a lot of fun. So how have analytics really changed since you began? How is the usage of analytics changed or evolved? And what's some way you can give a kind of a fun example of analytics for people listening right now whose eyes might glaze over when looking up at numbers? What's some sort of way you can help relate to them? So how has analytics changed? How has the usage changed? And how can you make it fun?
Good question. I think in terms of how it's changed, so the resources at the college level and some of it, like at a New Mexico State, there's just not a ton of money to invest in some of this stuff. And then at higher major schools, there is more money, but I just don't think or analytics is necessarily being prioritized. So I don't know that there has been that much improvement in the college, and this is much different for the NBA where they do invest a lot of money. But in the college world, I don't think there's been enough investment in different technology and things like that to really have like major improvements in the last several years. But I will say that the awareness of it just gets more and more every year, and there's probably less and less coaches every year who aren't doing something in it in terms of having someone on their staff, or just having more of a knowledge of it, and that'll only increase as the newer cycle of coaches keep like filtering into the Division I level.
Okay, and so is there some way you can kind of reel in somebody who says, you know what, numbers are boring?
Yeah, well, I guess that could be hard to get over. Like if you think numbers are boring, it probably wouldn't make sense to then show you a bunch of numbers, even if I think that they're cool, or insightful. But I guess what I would talk to that person about is the ideas that then come from the numbers. So the cliche one is like the 3-point revolution that has happened, especially in the NBA, where that was because of number crunching, I guess, that actionable coaching advice or actionable basketball advice was then built off of it to shoot more threes. And then because teams were shooting more threes, then teams started changing their ball screen coverages. And so I guess with those people, I wouldn't necessarily focus on the numbers or the data that is driving that strategy and those changes. I would just focus on the strategy itself.
Well, if you don't mind, I actually heard something in one of your podcasts I think is perfect for that. With Dave Klatsky of Colgate, he was talking about the value of various shots within the context of the offense, the player taking it, and so on, with the end takeaway being an example of how his team allowed 59, he's an assistant coach, his team allowed 59 points versus Cornell, but the expected value of the shots allowed had their expected score at 80 rather than 59, which was the actual number allowed. So right there, you can kind of I've always done that in a way when I rewatch games. I say, you know what? Even though that shot was missed, it was wide open. So you can't expect that to keep happening. It's kind of like Duke. They played Louisville before Carolina, and I think Louisville in the first half they were 4 for 9 on wide open jumpers, and the second half they were 1 for 9 on wide open jumpers, and it's like, okay, great, but I don't know how. Like that's a very much of an outlier game. And yeah, there's context surrounding that. There's noise to every single stat. But I think something like Dave Klasky talking about that, for me, who I don't want to say my eyes glaze over because I do appreciate and use analytics, I think that really related to me.
Yeah, and that is something that I think having an analytics mindset can really help with. So to use a completely different example, I talked about this a little bit with Jeff Goodman in his episode, was there's this perception maybe that for whatever reason analytics favors teams that blow out bad teams. So North Carolina State is this year's example. And my point is there's analytics is just trying to be as predictive as possible. And so it's the same thing as the 1 for 9 from three. If you have that mindset to, okay, this is what happened, but let's use all the information available to determine what will happen in the future. And it's the same thing as deciding what shots to take in a basketball game or predicting who's going to win in the future. So the reason why blowing out bad teams is seen as a good thing in analytics is because in the past that's been something that has been predictive of winning. And so it's a non-biased thing, and at least having that framework I think can help you make better decisions as a basketball coach or really in whatever line of work you're in.
Yeah, I think a great example on kind of the opposite side of what you were saying, but agreeing with your point, Michigan State last year. Fascinating team in how they were dominant in every stat you can imagine except for two. They turned the ball over too much and they did not force turnovers. Everything besides that, dominant. But then you look at their final scores, everything was close. They would win every game, it seemed, by less than 10. I think they actually came into the tournament winning something like 10 in a row by less than double digits. And it's just really tough to trust a team like that. And sure enough, they did lose. I'm not saying they lost because of that, but I mean, if they could never, ever blow a team out, even though they were really put together much better than their opponent, yeah, it is worth questioning. Whereas Duke, I think, at least for me, I totally understand the analytics and everything, but this Duke team is built to bludgeon teams that they are more talented than. They are long, they are athletic, they are wing heavy. So when you compare them to last year, where it was more big reliant, I think it's tougher to blow teams out, like just totally blow out of the water, than it is with this team, who they're just going to force turnovers and dunk on you nonstop. So this team, I think when they have that talent advantage more than a little bit, it could get bloody real fast. So I'm not sure how much to take out of it. But yeah, I mean, it's just an interesting way to evaluate whether you believe it or not. And I do. I think there's outliers to everything, but I definitely hear what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it would be something interesting to look at if Duke plays better in, I guess, better statistically in those games against really bad teams as opposed to the best teams. I guess my counter would be, well, they just beat Virginia 2 times in a row and no one else can do that. So that seems to show that they can also rise to the level of their opponent as well. But yeah, I could see it. The especially on defense, their pressure, their denials. I guess you could question how much that translates against higher level teams. I just don't know if the results back that up.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Eastern Michigan. They turned them over nonstop. Like, all the points were in transition. Eastern Michigan actually played zone versus Duke, and Duke was horrific. And even at that point, I knew that, you know what, when the game is slowed down, Duke's going to have trouble with some teams. And then they just kept finding these random outlier games when they played the best teams. Virginia, they would hit crazy amounts of mid-range the first game, insane three-pointers the second game. Florida State, outlier from three. So it's like, I don't know, are they just like trolling us or something? Are they just going to be able to say, you know what, you think we're bad at this, but when it comes time, we're going to all of a sudden step up and we're going to actually take that, what you considered a weakness, and now it's going to be a strength and you didn't see it coming. North Carolina, yeah, I mean, I think that's the first time that they couldn't overcome just being a really horrific half-court team. Obviously, Zion has a lot to do with that. So for analysis or evaluation, there's straight analytics, there's predictive analytics, X's and O's, there's the mental aspect, there's an eye test. What am I missing? And is it possible to kind of order these in terms of what you consider the most important, or even the type of analysis you enjoy the most? I'll repeat, the kind of straight analytics, predictive analytics, or maybe those are the same thing. X's and O's, mental, and the eye test.
Man, I don't know if you're missing anything necessarily. I don't know. It's the mental or like psychological part is not necessarily something I have a ton of experience in. I can tell you this, as a video coordinator at New Mexico State, if you go to our staff online, it would have all of our staff and like my office phone number and email and stuff was on there, and I would get calls from NBA people somewhat consistently about our potential NBA prospects, just looking to get to know the actual person that they were evaluating. They would be interested in and this had nothing to do with them calling me in particular. It's just probably, if anything, they're probably just calling the lowest guy on the staff because they would probably be the ones that would be the most responsive. And they would ask in terms of how I felt or how we felt from like a playing standpoint. But for the most part, they wanted to know about off the court stuff and if he's coachable and if he works on his game and that kind of stuff. And it's always a kind of weird dynamic because you're not gonna hurt your player.
Yeah, I mean that's tough. I was more considering what you do specifically in terms of game analysis. Like,
gotcha.
Like with Duke yesterday, it's not going to show up on stats, but when Zion went out, you would have to assume there's some mental drop off at least immediately after. And Kay said at halftime that's kind of when it hit him. And I know Kay's going to protect, Coach K, he's going to protect his players in certain ways. But, I mean, it's very believable. And I know sometimes we can get too wrapped up in narratives, which is something I would very much doubt you do. So that's why I asked. I'm not saying mental should be. I'm asking you.
Yeah.
It should. I mean, does it belong anywhere near those other categories?
I think that the problem with it is if Zion had gotten hurt and Duke won the game, then the narrative is that they rallied around their friend's injury and played inspired basketball for him. And so it's not that it's not, or it's not, I don't know if that's why Duke played poorly, is because they were in some type of shock or that contributed, but it's not something that I personally deal with because I can't really prove it one way or the other. And I guess that's kind of just thinking about now the background of the stuff that I have to do is to have proof. And that's why I gravitate towards the X's and O's stuff where you can literally show a clip of what's happening, and the analytics stuff where you have data. But that's not to say that the X's and O's stuff and the numbers too can't be sort of manipulated. And people give stats a lot of hate for that. But I would argue that film is actually worse. So for instance, from this Duke Carolina game, I have clips of I clipped out the whole game, so I have offensive and defensive possessions, and what I did was I labeled good and bad pretty much. So for the Carolina offense when Duke was playing defense, I looked at it from UNC's perspective, and if I thought it was a good possession, I labeled it good. If I thought it was a bad possession, I labeled it bad. And so I could make a video just showing the good ones or just showing the bad ones and prove an entirely different point. So it's just as much about the person putting the film together as it is the film itself. And it's the same thing with numbers and stats too. But yeah, that's a little bit on that, I guess.
Okay, and one other form of analysis I kind of wanted to see if you might bring up, especially with you when you were at New Mexico State and when you're at Nevada, in person. Watching it live, whether it's practice or game, do you think that provides a different perspective and possibly a better perspective at times?
So, with the amount of money that NBA teams are spending on their scouting and travel budgets for that kind of stuff, I would have to imagine that it must. We are at the college level. I'm pretty sure the rules are that you're not allowed to live scout. I know for a fact that we don't do it, but I think there might be rules against it. The only time that we would do it is at tournaments. So like last year at New Mexico State, we played in the Diamond Head Classic in Hawaii, and we got to scout our future opponents. And then in our conference tournament, obviously before and after your games, you're scouting. And then in the NCAA tournament too, we played Clemson in the first round last year, and the game before us was Auburn and College of Charleston. And so I went to the arena early, and we were trying to live scout in case we won the Clemson game. Personally, I am not good at the live scouting type of stuff, and I think that's probably more of a function of me. I think that there is advantages to be gained if you have a lot of experience in it, because you get to see the length and the athleticism and just the feel and flow a little bit better. But those are all the advantages. All the disadvantages are you have to have a really, really quick eye to see what's happening. You don't have a pause and a rewind button that I'm really used to. And so I think it's more a function of the fact that I don't have like reps at the live scouting stuff, rather than like one being better than the other.
Well, don't worry, Jordan. Once you solve basketball, I'm sure it'll get much easier. All right. So, yeah, I mean, I did have one more question for the intro, but I think I kind of want to save that for the end, because at the end, I want to get into coverage, and I'll kind of hint at it, and it's why are you really the only person? I don't know if it's just you found your niche, or just I've never understood how there's no one else consistently doing it in terms of X's and O's, the video stuff, but that all kind of factors into coverage and how different. Yeah, you know what? We'll get into that at the end. I think right now, I think it'd be fun to just, in terms of preparing for the Duke UNC game, in terms of what you saw, and in terms of after it was over, your reactions to it, your analysis. I want to kind of take a trip inside your head and see what goes on there. So, and this isn't just for Duke UNC. This is how I hope you can really get across how you would prepare for any game. Obviously, some you'll do differently than others, but when I know Duke Carolina, obviously a big game. Not all of them you're going to spend a whole lot of prep time on. Am I correct in assuming you did spend some time on Duke, North Carolina?
Yeah, so I did a video of North Carolina versus Duke, the Carolina pick versus Duke for the last 10 years. That was more a lot. It wasn't necessarily trying to think about how Kobe White was going to fit into it or how some of the new guys were going to fit, but more so just like a historical look. But yeah, I would say there's probably 1 or 2 games a week where I'm trying to go the extra mile, and one would definitely classify.
Okay, so what is the first thing you would do? You know, Duke is playing North Carolina. Let's say you're looking into North Carolina. Are you going to first watch film, or are you going to Synergy or another analytics site? Where are you going?
I am probably so the biggest thing for me is ultimately I you need to have a story or a narrative if you're going to make a video or a Twitter thread or something like that. But in my opinion, you want to hold out from having that story or narrative as long as possible until you've watched all the film and looked at all the numbers possible. Because it can get and if I was working for a team, then it doesn't have to necessarily be narrative based. But the fact of the matter is, I want people to watch my videos.
Right.
So there has to be that element. But a great deal of care goes into it to
Can I just
try to
interrupt for 1 second?
Yep.
The music in your videos really, really pretty bad at first, and I gotta say, I applause. You are getting good with it with some beat drops lately, and I mean DJ Spur beats. I gotta give it to you. A round of applause on there. So the music is getting much better. Check out his SoundCloud. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Definitely not my specialty, but the flip side would be just listening to me talk all day. So that's I do like having the background music
There
in.
you go.
But anyways, so uh, what was I talking
I'm
about?
sorry, I made you lose your train of thought.
No worries, no worries.
All right. So you're thinking about Carolina. You're thinking about they run the break.
Oh
You
yeah,
made
yeah,
that
yeah.
video, and I mean, I'll say for me, I mean I know from just kind of Carolina every year. There's always 3 things that I know always true. At least from a Duke. I mean, I'm a Duke fan, but like it's really weird. Nobody thinks it's possible. I am unbiased in what I do. I analyze the game. So I mean, North Carolina, they always attack the offensive glass, no matter what their size is. I think it's really fascinating how no matter who's on their team, they will always attack the offensive glass and do really well there. They will always push pace, maybe not to the level of this season, and they will never guard threes. So before anything, I already know those 3 things, and I've never been proven wrong about those 3 things. And I mean, maybe I'll check KenPom just like a quick glance before I watch film and Synergy and go deeper. But I mean, there's kind of stuff like you showing the break. There are narratives that it's not trying to prove anything. It's just kind of what's been over the years.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point, especially with the pregame stuff, and then the postgame is a little bit different because you know Zion goes out and so that kind of changes everything. But like watching the game the first time, and this is the same thing with the pregame, the pregame prep too. You might have sort of ideas that you think a team is good or bad at something, or this is a reason why they've been successful. But you want to hold out on that as long as possible and make sure that is actually the reality. And so, I think, for instance, I saw a lot of talk pregame about North Carolina's early offense, or their transition numbers aren't good this year. So that would be something that I wouldn't if I was working for a team, I would probably want the stats first and to be as efficient as possible. But sometimes with this stuff, I almost, as to whether I look at the film or the stats first, it's like I hold off on the stats as long as possible. I try to see what I see, then I go to stats, then I watch some more, and I do feel, I mean, this is probably misguided. Like, not enough people really are watching the stuff or really care what I have to say, but I at least treat it like that's the case, and try to be as accurate as possible.
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, if I'm wrong, I mean, you know more than me. So tell me, I am the one who I think I tweeted you those stats in terms of Carolina. They score a ton in transition. They get out. They run. I mean, it's insane. Savannah State, who nobody will ever run more than Savannah State, but North Carolina is number 2, and I think Duke's like number 12. And Carolina's like 10% higher in terms of their initial field goal attempts. It's something like 42% right now. Duke is 32%, and Duke is 12, and Carolina's number 2. I mean, Carolina runs off of everything, but Carolina is pretty horrific in terms of their points per possession rate. So, you said you disagreed with that in terms of the way it actually shows on film?
Not necessarily. I think that there's a lot of context to it, in terms of just the fact that they want to run at all cases is going to lower their efficiency a little bit. The other thing about synergy, or I can't remember if you use synergy or hoop math, or maybe both, is that it doesn't it doesn't take into account offensive rebounds. And offensive rebounds in synergy, offensive rebounds get counted in its own bucket. It wouldn't be counted as transition. In hoop math, I believe it's the same thing. It's only, those transition numbers are only first shot attempts of a possession. And this isn't necessarily just a transition offense thing with Carolina, but they're just a really good offensive rebounding team. Coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, I'm not entirely sure, but they did have some offensive rebounds last night in transition. Whether that would boost them up enough to be efficient, I don't know, and probably not. But it's like, in terms of evaluating the matchup with Duke, I'm not sure that you can look at those numbers and then say, well, I think that they could slow it down. That's what they do. It would be hard to sort of make an adjustment when that's like such a strong identity for a Roy Williams team.
Yeah, their percent of initial field goal attempts on the offensive rebounds, 22.7. And just the overall field goal attempts in transition, including it, that's 34.7. So without the offensive rebounds and with the offensive rebounds, they're number 2. But I mean, it's very context dependent. You are absolutely right about that. So I'm looking through synergy. I'm looking at Carolina right now, and looking at, the first thing is the overall offense. I mean, what pops out immediately is just transition, where they're in the 31st percentile. So I'm thinking, how could they run that much? And you've explained it. Is there anything, do you have synergy up for North Carolina?
Yep.
Okay, is there anything that stands out just of the overall offense? And also, let me just, this is a tiny little rant. Why, synergy, like, please let me watch the video. I don't coach and I don't work for a big site, and I've emailed them a bunch of times, like, no, you haven't signed up for this. I'm like, can I? They're like, no. So Please let me watch the video, Synergy. That's all I have to say about that. Okay. So is there anything that stands out of the overall offense?
Well, let's see. So I'm looking at the page now too, and yeah, I was curious. So the way Synergy works is percentiles, which I guess makes sense. It can take a little bit of getting used to if you haven't necessarily been on Synergy, but
I usually click and find the exact rank. So yeah.
Okay. Yep. So they're 31 percentile in transition efficiency, and then if you click through that, Synergy has them fourth in transition positions, or actually percentage of time. So like you said, Savannah State is number one. Actually that's pretty good. Just the fact that it's very close to hoop math in that sense. And then just on this page in general, I don't think that we would get a ton out of just the main team page. So some things that we would get out of Synergy is each player, it has their lefty and righty drives. If you go on their player pages, how often they drive left, how often they drive right, off of both isolations and spot ups. So I would usually combine those two together, especially during conference tournament time when sample size is pretty big. That would be, we had a booklet where we would go into the conference tournament with a booklet of all the teams that we could potentially play, and that would be some of the information that is on there. And then another example that I use a lot is we played a really ball screen heavy team in our conference, Utah Valley, and Synergy for that, you actually have to export the data. So the site doesn't really show this stuff up front, but they have a ton of information on ball screen offense. So for each player, and Utah Valley ran so many ball screens that each player had like 100 or however many, 100, 200. It would say, if they went left, if they went right, where they were on the court, if they rejected the ball screen, if they used it, all these tendencies that aren't necessarily being aren't being displayed in a good way on Synergy. And so that is where I would try to come in and display them in a better way for our staff.
That reminds me, gives me nightmares of Gonzaga earlier in the season against Duke, just screening the hell out of them. All right, so just for a casual person who sees transition 31%, half court 94% ranked, I'm thinking, why does Roy keep saying he wants to run nonstop? Why does this team run more than any team since Raymond Felton in 2005? When it seems like they're so good in the half court, they're such good shooters, they spread the floor, so why don't they run more if just someone who hasn't watched them a lot?
Yeah, so the fact that...
Did I ask why don't they run more? I mean, why don't they actually...
The opposite.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I understand. So the percentiles are relative to that play type. So they are 31st percentile in transition and 94th in overall half court, but they are actually more efficient in transition. It's just that that's relative to everyone else's transition offense. So Synergy has 0.985 points per play in transition and 0.971 in the half court. And so that is where, even though they aren't great efficiency-wise compared to everyone else's transition is just almost always going to be more efficient than half court. And specifically, a team like UNC that is so disciplined in their transition, throughout the years, they're 5 men. It's got to be one of the main things that they focus on, is literally running the court. It's easy. All coaches will say when they get hired that they want to play fast, but it's like anything else. You really need to emphasize it, and they are kind of a machine in the way that they do it. As to why they're 31st percentile, I would say Kobe White takes some pretty bad shots at times. He's very capable of making them, but he probably doesn't run the team quite as well as some of the past Carolina point guards. He's very talented, and he can make bad shot, he can make bad shots, but I would imagine that the point guard is very important in that, and he would at least be a partial reason for it.
Definitely, and I hate to nitpick on this, but I mean, you look at the spot up stats and the off screen stats. I mean, I was trying to figure out when they were the better shooting perimeter team than Duke, when the last time Carolina played Duke, and they were the better perimeter shooting team, because it's just crazy. Obviously, that didn't quite equate to yesterday's game, where it was almost like Duke Virginia Part 1, where they were efficient on twos, not on threes. The difference is Duke Virginia Part 1, they were well guarded, whereas yesterday everyone was just missing. But typically, Carolina, the spot up, it's not just the 99th percentile. The points per possession is better than transition. You look at the catch and shoot. I mean, they are excellent, both guarded and unguarded. Unguarded, they are 99th percentile, guarded 95th. So, I mean, I'm not going to try to harp on it too much. It's just they are a great shooting team. So maybe it's just a way to boost their energy in some way. I don't know. So that's why I'm just really interested in what you have to say.
Yeah, so the spot ups and the cuts and the off screens and all that stuff is really just a subset of half court. So the way Synergy does it is transition is its own bucket, offensive rebounds are its own bucket, and then everything else you see there is what makes up that half court number. Maybe I would agree that given how good they are on these spot ups, Carolina's offense is not really built in a way, when their fast break stalls out, they go into motion. And there aren't a ton of teams still running motion. Texas Tech is a good example of another elite team that's running motion. But probably being more ball screen heavy, more spacing heavy, and driving and kicking to generate those spot ups might make some sense given the data that we're seeing. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised at just how good that number is. But yeah, the larger point is that it's really just a bucket of the half court. Right. So it's actually a little redundant in that sense, but it provides more context.
Yeah, I mean the 3-pointers in half court. I mean it's crazy. There's actually 3 ACC teams in the top 12. Carolina's 12 at 1.183 points per possession. UVA is number 8, and Virginia Tech is number 3. So that's pretty surprising. But I remember Virginia Tech, when they went up against Virginia, they couldn't hit anything from outside. So obviously it's context dependent, who you're playing, all kinds of stuff, and that's where you come in. You're so great at it. So more about UNC. Is there anything else that might stick out from their offense, or do you think it's time to go to defense, or maybe individuals? Is there something individual where it's, this person is really good at blank, we got to concentrate on this just by a stat? I know the best is to combine the stats and the film, but just starting out, is there anything that sticks out that lets you know you should watch film to see how it occurred?
Yeah, if I was going to do something, if I was scouting North Carolina, what I would want to do is they're transition heavy. The Carolina break is their big thing. I would want to chart out every single, maybe not every single at this point in the season, but at least the last 10 games or so, all the different options in the Carolina break. So there's a back screen lob play. After that, there's a cross screen. They can drag screen. They can throw and chase. There's all these different things that are built into the break, and it goes back to almost how Tony Bennett's system at Virginia is really easy to chart and know what they're in. I guess there is some similarities with Roy Williams there, and so for a system team like that, that's what I would have tried to do: chart every single type, and this is a little bit more specific than Synergy. Because Synergy is doing this for all 353 teams and not necessarily customizing for the specific team. Mm-hmm. And so see where they score the most in that break, and then present that to the coaching staff in the scouting process of how we're going to ultimately guard these things. So like at New Mexico State, I wasn't necessarily making the decisions on how we were going to guard, but I was trying to provide information that could help the people that were making those decisions.
Okay, so should I assume you would have been, like at New Mexico State, you would have been watching the other team's games, not all season, but would you... I guess if New Mexico State is playing, I feel bad. What's the team in their conference?
Grand Canyon.
Grand Canyon. Oh, man, I would rant for so long about them before this season because they were a for pay college before, and I couldn't stand that where they would have these like NBA gyms, and Dan Marley was like, "Oh, come here," where it looks like they're playing in like a palace, and I was like, that's not fair. But now they're on even ground, so totally cool. Love you, Grand Canyon. But if they're playing Grand Canyon, should I expect you would have seen video on them throughout the season, or are you going to be digging deep into the film right before it is? And how much do you take the previous game, the last game right before? Like are you going to watch a lot of North Carolina? I think there was Wake Forest they played, and if North Carolina, you're going to watch a lot of Louisville, who Duke just played, or are you going to kind of take it an overall how the season's gone?
So generally the way it works is there are 3 assistant coaches on staff, and they rotate as the scout. So as the video coordinator, my job essentially was to help those 3 assistant coaches. So ideally, the scouts get divvied up in a way where it's assistant coach number 1, then 2, then 3, then back to 1. It doesn't always quite work like that, but as soon as they're done with their scout, they're moving on to the next team they have, even if it's a couple weeks away. And they're really, for the most part, focused on their teams, and that's how you have someone on your staff that's an expert at that team when the game comes. Personally, I was a little bit more flexible in my time. So I mean, we like to think that every game gets treated equally. It's somewhat the case, somewhat not the case. If we had a particularly big game coming up, or just a team where I thought like analytics or something like that could provide extra value, I might focus a little bit more on that. And then also, if an assistant coach had like back-to-back scouts, if that's how the schedule worked out, I would probably be helping more with that second team, so that he was all set in his preparation. So that. And then your other part about is the last game used more heavily? Probably not, because all the film that we're going to watch with the team has been already put together in a lot of cases at that point. You need to work ahead and have that put together. So what is then going to happen is on day 1 of preparing for that team, you're probably going to use the last 5 games or so to put together all your edits to show the guys. And then the next day, you are going to use that as a baseline, but you are going to have the most recent game, which you just probably spent like all night watching, and you are going to use those clips to either talk about something they're doing differently, or just emphasize, okay, they did these things in the last game. And so it depends how much time you have to prep, but you're going to keep using the newer clips more as you get closer to the game day.
So you're thinking, don't melt down like Louisville when Duke presses. Okay.
Right.
So the last thing about Carolina offense, one thing, just because I know how good what am I thinking? Cam Johnson has been shooting outside. I'm looking at the pick and roll ball handler when they shoot. That's 22%, 22% ranking, and points per possession, 0.7. But when you look at the passes out of the pick and roll, when it's from the roll, I saw it. Here it is. Pick and roll man, 93% right there, and then including passes in the 98th percentile there. So when they're running the pick and roll, it was almost like when Duke played FSU, they were running it to pass, whereas FSU was most of the time to their 7-foot, 25-foot guys. I think Carolina, they do a lot of pop. So when Cam Johnson, when there's pick and roll, I would just, and this is just me as some random person, so tell me I'm wrong, if I am wrong, which I probably am. I would just really, really make sure whoever's guarding him, whether it be Cam Reddish or whoever, stick to him. Don't let him pop with an open shot. Make sure you fight through that screen, because that's what's generally going to happen. Not every time, but with how good they shoot, especially how good he shoots, we'll just watch out for it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think as a rule, teams, at least these top tier teams that I've really been focused on, they give up too many rhythm threes out of their ball screen coverages, to the point where I think that they should look into changing the coverages altogether. I will say, pretty much regardless, like the roll man is always going to be the highest points per possession, because you're generally not throwing it to him and he's not shooting unless he's open. So there's a little bit of almost selection bias there, but that doesn't take away from your overall point, I don't think, at all. That taking away the three in ball screen coverage is very important.
The sample size on the roll is also pretty small. I'm looking at it. Where is it? 54 possessions. So they don't. It's pretty much. They pop. It's how many? Here we go. 144 possessions. A much bigger sample size, and that's 98%. So yeah, I mean that's what I planned for. The roll, I kind of just used it because they do it sometimes, and they're much better than when the ball handler shoots. But more often than not, they are going to be kicking out.
Yeah. And so to get sort of technical, like a lot of teams will hedge ball screens, and so what that is the guy guarding the big man, who's setting the ball screen. That guy hedges out and prevents the ball handler from getting to the hoop. So theoretically, that is going to take away the ball handler driving or shooting off of the ball screen. And what the hedge does is it puts you at risk for the roller. But like you said, those numbers are so low. So how does the hedge ball screen coverage work? Well, the answer is Cam Johnson or whoever's guarding someone like that, his man comes and helps, or what's called tags on the guy rolling to the basket. And so that's what the defense is trying to take away in the hedge. They're trying to take away the ball handler, and then they're trying to take away the roll man. And then the third thing is they're trying to recover to the spot up guy, the Cam Johnson or whoever it is. And so that is why teams give up a lot of threes. And it's something that we've seen from quite a few teams. Kansas would be one that comes to mind as well, as a team that gives up a lot of threes out of ball screens.
Okay, and last question before we move to Duke's offense. Would you say it's a matter of there's just more athletic ability in the NBA in terms of being able to recover? Because I don't see, and I could very well be missing it, there's not a lot of screen the screener to take away the hedges. I see that a ton in the NBA. Am I wrong? And if I am right, why isn't there more?
Well, shooting is definitely better in the NBA. Spacing is better as well. But I think that the NBA is a lot more progressive in their ball screen coverages. So for the most part, teams don't hedge anymore in the NBA. They keep the big back, whether it's icing, which means not letting the ball handler get into the middle and then keeping the big back in to play a gap. Or it could just be, some people call it a soft hedge. I think at New Mexico State we called it a shadow, where you're not getting aggressive. You're basically, I think the NBA literally like states how many gaps they want: 1 gap, 2 gap, 3 gap, and that is not really well. There are teams doing it in college, but for the most part, Virginia is a hedge team. Kansas is a hedge team. Duke will switch a lot, which is an NBA thing. They'll hedge a little bit. They've tried to ice. North Carolina is a hedge team. So for the most part, if you look at the top 10, you are going to see a lot of hedging, which you won't see as much in the NBA.
Awesome information. And do they keep stats on the short roll in the NBA?
So the NBA has this site, I guess, called Second Spectrum, which is like Synergy on steroids. So they keep everything in the NBA is the answer. I actually have not used Second Spectrum, but I've had it sort of explained to me, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure Synergy uses humans to do all this stuff, loggers, whereas the NBA has machine learning and tracking technology that does it all automated, and then the insights can therefore be a little bit greater. So yeah, they do track things like short rolls, and even like ball screen coverages would be on Second Spectrum.
Cool. All right, so Duke's offense, and I think I might be just kind of ignorant in thinking that, I mean, with how bad their half-court offense is a lot of the time, and how stagnant it can be, I mean, and how dependent it is for just, they need to get in transition. They need more opportunities on the break. They need offensive rebounds, and they need free throws. They just need as many chances as they can, because when they're in half court, it's I mean, they just basically chuck. I mean, the jumpers, they're like 1%, 2% right there. It's pretty much mostly ISO. Their spot up is like, it's pretty horrific. And the only thing which gives them some creativity, it seems, is when they get the ball to Zion. And then things happen. That creates action. I mean, O'Connell, I was actually hoping he could step up and provide some scoring yesterday, because they do run him off screens. They do actually get him involved more and make it so it's not just ISO offense. But when you think about Duke, I mean, it's like the Bucks, they surround Giannis with a bunch of shooters. And then besides Bolden and Javin, I think that's what was hoped for. I mean, Zion obviously can't, but Zion's insane. But nobody hits. Nobody can hit. Jack White, it almost seems like Syracuse might have crushed his confidence. That's why I'm talking about mental, because there's no way to actually chirp that. But, I mean, Trey Jones, he's not even being guarded half the time anymore. I mean, O'Connell, I hope he can hit. Can't. Jordan Goldwire can't. So, I mean, yesterday, when they're shooting 1 for 24, I mean, it's just, I don't know. It seems like teams are just going to pile on RJ and Cam. It's amazing how, I mean, when you have guys who can just create their own nonstop, when you have three, it's the big three. But when it comes down to two, you could be in trouble. So I guess, so sorry, that was a little long, right there, long-winded. But when you're thinking about Duke, how are you thinking about them before Zion is potentially out compared to after?
Yeah, I would hesitate to rush to extreme judgments, but I will say that yesterday was concerning for sure. If we're going back into the synergy numbers for Duke, I think that the fact that their isolation and their ball screen stuff is so high, given that their spot up is so low, it shows the power of Zion and RJ. It's all related to each other in that the better floor spacing you have, the easier it is to isolate and drive.
Okay,
and
can I stop you there and ask, what is a big enough sample size for you to consider a number legit? Because when you look at those numbers, I mean, spot up's huge, transition's huge, offensive rebounds are huge, and cuts. Okay, I mean, how much is big enough? What percentage of the offense would you consider?
I don't really have a guideline necessarily, but I would say that we are getting into the point of the season where certainly, there's a lot of spot ups being taken a game, and like you said, the percentage of time does factor into it a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. I would say that you would like to see at least like 100 field goal attempts of each of them. Obviously, 100 is just a conveniently very round number and
Right.
not some type of statistical like certainty on it. But yeah, it's a give and take, like we've been talking about the whole time, between the stats and then the video to back it up.
Okay, so when you're looking at shot attempt in the half court,
Mhm.
you got jump shots, which is they take over 51.7% of their half court shots. Runners, they're good. And then around the basket and post ups are really good. But they take so many jump shots that, do you think that, because I remember listening to I believe it was Rob Dowster saying about I think Musselman actually, that he kind of just lets his three guys make plays. He gets them in the best positions possible and just lets them create. And it seems like, hey, that's what he does. He just tries to get them in good position. And sometimes, I mean, when you have guys that can just create their own, yeah, I mean, don't mess with it. Especially freshmen who probably didn't have too many kind of X's and O's in their heads in high school. I don't know. I could be wrong, very wrong. But yeah, I just remember, like, hey, even during the Olympics in 2016, I'll never forget Paul George. I'm not going to say he was angry. He was just frustrated because it was the same type of offense, this kind of spread ISO where nothing was going on, nobody was moving. And it was just like, it's tough to really generate energy from that. So I wish there was more, but I actually, before this podcast, I sent you a link of some of the plays from the 2015 NCAA tournament. Because I was so kind of craving to, hey, remember the days of when Duke actually ran sets? And the play I asked about, a Virginia play, UVA, you said they ran that last game, which just shows how completely ignorant I am and how I might just be missing all of it. So, how do you feel about what I said? And I mean, is Duke running many sets or at least action?
No, I think that you're giving yourself too little credit. Actually, I think you're pretty much spot on. So, I can pull it up here, but I can tell you exactly how many sets that Duke ran. Before I do that, I can tell you this: in terms of like action, and there's a little bit of a distinction between a set and an action. A set is probably more of a planned, like scripted play, whereas an action could be like, it could be something that you run within that play, or it could be just something more unscripted, like a motion cut or screen. And so the only thing that they really ran that got them any points in terms of actions or sets was a little pin down. I think Reddish scored maybe 2 jumpers coming off of a little pin down action, and then someone else did as well. So I had like 6 points generated off of pin downs, and then the rest of it is mostly just kind of like the rolling it out playing that you're talking about. They probably ran about 6-7 sets, and 6 or 7 total, not necessarily different sets, but total sets. But they're not really with the intent to like get a look on each one. So it's more just to get some movement every once in a while and put the guys in the right spot. Even that UVA set, which is a pin down on one side and a flare screen on the other side, they weren't really running it with the purpose that would be needed to generate points directly off of it. And yeah, so first of all, Duke is ranked 3rd in the country right now in adjusted offensive efficiency. So it's important to keep that in mind. But there was some evidence yesterday without Zion that they probably, if he's out for a significant amount of time, would need to start generating more points off of some action or some sets. At New Mexico State, we called it manufacturing some points. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that they really need to do that with the healthy Zion. It can look a little bit ugly at times, even with him, but the concept since really the first game in the Champions Classic has been, we don't need that much player movement. We just need great spacing. We have great players. And then the swing factor to me was ball movement, because sometimes the ball movement has been good, sometimes not so good. But without Zion, you need more of the player movement.
I mean, one thing I think would help, I've stopped harping on this. I used to just every single year kind of hope that K would help his point guards out a little more. And with Trey coming to Duke, he knew what he was getting into because obviously Tyus went to Duke. But the offense is so, at least the initiating, because the point guard basically, from what I've seen, their responsibility is to be successful in transition. They run the show in transition, but in the half court, they're a spot-up shooter. And it's always somebody else who's running it. I mean, you go back to like 2014. It seemed like K was consistently trying to find a way to replace Quinn Cook with Tyler Thornton or Rashid Suleiman. By 2015, by the tournament, you could say it was mostly Justice Winslow who was initiating half-court offense with some Quinn. Not really Tyus as much. 2016, instead of Derek Thornton, it was mostly Grayson with some Luke Kennard and even Matt Jones. 2017, Frank Jackson, he was more of a combo guard, but he wanted to come there and learn how to be a point guard. Instead, it was Grayson again and somehow still Matt Jones. At times, 2018, Grayson over Trevon Duval, and 2019, RJ over Trey. And I'm not saying every single possession, every single set, but the mass majority of the time, they are the ones who are initiating the offense, and you look at the pick and roll stats, absolutely, to try to create action. That's who it's going to. I mean, Grayson Trevon Duval never really got much. And, I mean, yesterday, I think RJ Barrett, he got something like 10 pick and roll opportunities just in the second half. And I'm just thinking, give Trey a little help because, I mean, the guy can't shoot. And, I mean, okay, that's mean. He struggles at times. But just to have him as a spot-up shooter, I think wastes his ability in some aspects to make everyone around him better, even if he's not hitting from outside. And I think that sometimes gets lost. So I'm sorry again, that was long-winded. Do you have any thoughts on the Duke point guard situation?
Yeah, I think that you're onto something for sure. I don't know those teams as well as I know the current team, the current Duke team, but I mean I know some stuff about those teams. Like you mentioned Justice Winslow was playing point guard by the end of the year, and I do remember that, and obviously Grayson Allen, um, but yeah, so uh, it's hard to say right now without knowing the long term prognostication for Zion, but I have a post game video hopefully coming out soon, and one thing that I am toying around with is what the offense would look like with Trey Jones being a primary facilitator. Um, And I don't know. I don't know. We probably don't have enough examples of it to really have a great idea. Uh, but it's again, it could be jumping the gun a little bit.
It's John.
But
I'm Jordan. You are smarter than me. You are better than me. It's not going to happen. I mean, I hope. Oh, I really hope I'm wrong. But I've gone over this year after year after year.
there was one thing in the Coach K press conference, which I didn't really listen to the whole thing, but he did talk about the fact that something to the, I don't want to misquote him, but something to the extent that it could be if they had time to prepare for life without Zion, and so I think that they've been somewhat adaptive this season in terms of the switching 1 through 5 against Virginia. They go zone, which I know they've been doing for years now.
Oh yeah, defense. He's been very adaptive. It's offense. They really set something at the beginning of the season and just kind of that's it.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see. I would defer to you in terms of the like Duke's habits in these types of situations because I know that you followed them very closely for years. But looking at the film, I mean, there's a couple of plays where it's like, wow, they are not guarding Jack White, Delorier, or Trey Jones.
Right.
Um, and we need to do something to keep them honest. I don't know if that is put the ball in Trey Jones's hands more, but it might be. It might be.
Yeah, just create some action. I mean, what's the worst thing that can happen? Who knows? I mean, I don't know if afraid is the right word, but like I'm almost willing to say how Trey's a great on-ball defender. How different is he from Derek Thornton?
I don't know Derek Thornton's on-ball defense too well, but fill me in.
He was tremendous. I don't think he could quite generate as many steals, but if you remember the Carolina game in 2016, I think he blocked Joel Berry's shot to win the game, and there were some issues behind the scenes which they are what they are, and it's just like he kind of he came in from the bench and then he was starting, then bench start. It was a weird situation, and obviously he ended up transferring. But in terms of just being a great defensive point guard, I thought he was. And then when Coach K was out, I remember that was just one game that year. It was versus Georgia Tech, and Jeff Capel put him in as point guard. He started. He was fantastic. He used a lot of pick and roll, and he really did well. And Capel's using a lot of pick and roll at Pitt. Obviously, they just don't have the talent right now. But I think Capel really wants to develop his point guards, and he's got a great backcourt, a young backcourt right now. But I think, I mean, Thornton's not tremendous. He's having his struggles at USC right now. So I'm not saying he's an otherworldly point guard or anything. I just think there's ways you can help, especially if your point guard's not a good catch and shoot type of, he's not successful in that role. Then what is he doing on offense if you're not using him? You're just having him, Jack White, O'Connell, Javin to just stand around. I just don't know. It's a lot of pressure to put on Cam and RJ. Not that they can't handle it. It's just I don't know how efficient that's going to end up.
Yeah, and it's like a chicken or the egg thing, as to who to sort of blame, I guess. So blame is kind of harsh, but with Trey Jones and Jack White right now, they haven't really earned the credibility for them to be in the corner, and as soon as their man helps, boom, I'm making that pass. Sometimes it seems like RJ has some tunnel vision on his drives, but on the other hand, um, it's like I said, it's that credibility factor. And someone is going to one of those two is gonna start making shots at some point. Um, but yeah, it puts RJ and then Cam Reddish to an extent in an extremely difficult position to be driving, drawing three or four guys, and not being able to kick out and maintain advantages from those double teams or triple teams.
Yeah, I mean they have guys that are great in their roles, great glue guys. I think O'Connell's the one who he's going to get beat on defense at times. He's going to make some head scratching decisions at times, but you would expect him to be able to score. That's what he can do. He moves all the time, creates energy, and he can shoot. So if he's going to be out there, I would hope they will run action for him, and he can give them some scoring because the others they're just going to be there, kind of playing their role. I think O'Connell's the one who can hopefully generate more, and obviously Trey, if you give him more action. So, all right, last question before I finish up with just kind of college basketball coverage. Why don't teams press more? Am I imagining that teams used to press more? I mean, maybe I'm just constantly thinking of how much I hate that Arkansas 1994 team and Scotty Thurman with his rainbow three over Antonio Lang to beat Duke in the national championship. I'm just kidding. That was a great team. But I mean, what was that? 60 Minutes of Hell? Or is that what it's called? I'm probably
40 minutes.
Yeah, definitely not 60. Okay. Am I imagining the teams used to press more, or is kind of I don't know. I just look at Duke and their ability to create havoc. I know desperation, kind of when you're down trying to come back, makes you all of a sudden you've got magical energy. But is there a reason Duke isn't pressing for longer periods of time? Is it just because maybe their legs will get tired or something? What? And just that it's not just for Duke. For any team that has the ability, it just doesn't seem like teams press as consistently as they did, and I could be very wrong there.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about then compared to now. There are some mid majors that press, and a few high majors usually in a given year. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's prevalent by any means. I would agree there. I just don't really know what it was like 20 years ago, or even less than that, 10 years ago.
Well, what was the team with was it Mount St. Mary's? No.
Yeah. So Shaka Smart and VCU started pressing, and his coaching tree has now he's got 6 or 7 guys who are all coaches. Most of them are like on the exactly on the East Coast, and one of his guys in the tree, Jamion Christian, was at Mount St. Mary's. He's now at Siena. And for a lot of the teams that press are either in the Shaka Smart coaching tree, the Rick Pitino coaching tree would be another one, or the Bob Huggins coaching tree.
Yeah, I remember
tree.
reading the book by Adrian Wojnarowski, who about the '92 Kentucky team. I think that was about the '92 game between Duke and Kentucky, where basically. Yeah, I'm sorry. Where Pitino would just run them nonstop, and they'd be like dying, and the assistants would be just grinding them down. But that's what made them ready to run all game, every game. And I really appreciate the way you covered me on Mount St. Mary's, because that's not what I meant at all. I actually meant it was a different team, but it was Paul Westphal. What was that team?
Loyola Marymount, maybe?
Yes, that is exactly what I meant. I don't know how you covered for me, but thank you. Loyola Marymount, they're scoring like 1,000 points a game, and obviously they were giving up the same. I mean, it's kind of like Savannah State, but with Bo Kimball and Hank Gathers. Was that more of a press? Am I just imagining that, or they just, I don't know, how did they score so much?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we are. I was born in '93, so we are. I'm struggling here. I'm really proud of myself that I got the Paul Westhead Loyola Marymount.
You know what? I think I even said Paul Westphal. I was way off.
Well, no. Mostly I'm just basking in the trivia knowledge right now that I got that right. So no, I don't have much to add though.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm just kind of the good old days type of thing. Okay, so college basketball coverage. Let's finish up with that. Were you aware when you started doing the X's and O's, because the analytics you're fantastic at, the whatever the bracketology stuff with the what's the new way to rank?
Net.
Yeah, with the net, you're fantastic with that. I am not all about that. I fully respect it, and it's not because of Duke. I am also a Maryland fan. I graduated from Towson. I'm a Towson fan. That is one team always on the bubble and one team that's not even close to the bubble. So it's not any sort of better than the bubble thing with Duke. It's I don't know. I don't have too much interest in it. But you are great with that. You are great with the analytics. But the X's and O's, that's what I've been craving for years. I mean, Rob Douster would do it occasionally, and I would always kind of shout him out every time he did, kind of wondering why there wasn't more. Obviously, there is supply and demand with everything. There has to be a demand for it. But when you started doing it consistently, not just once in a while, I mean, you were just putting out these videos, which are just fantastic, immediately got my attention. Did you realize nobody else was doing it?
Yeah, for the most part, there are sort of like coaching based videos, I would say. So Gibson Piper, who you mentioned, would be probably the best example of someone who is doing it for coaches. And I think that I've dipped into that a little bit, where hopefully a coach would be interested in my content. But I also have the fan base, or just the college basketball fans, in mind as well. And so that is hopefully where I've differentiated myself. But like you said, it's supply and demand, and we're still trying to make it a viable business, I guess, long term. And so we'll see where it all goes.
Yeah, because I mean, you have so many of these analytics sites, so many analytics people, and they're all great. And if I forgot anyone who's doing X's and O's coverage, I apologize. But just in terms of, I like to know the how and the why. And it's just, it frustrates me. This is a me thing, that I don't know how others don't kind of wonder about like, hey, this team won, because they wanted it more. Is that really why you believe they won? Like, I mean, and that's the kind of description of how a team wins at times. UNC won yesterday because Zion was out. There's really actually no analysis. It's really weird. Duke played, their defense totally changed versus Kansas last year. Nobody really even asked Kay about it, and it just makes me curious how enough people. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a minority, but it fascinates me about why more people don't know. I remember watching, I think it was the Olympics. I think it was like an interview with the gymnastics announcers, and they actually said that they were not supposed to get technical when describing what was going on, because that'll overwhelm the listeners. That'll be too much. And it just made me think, like, I kind of, I'm not a gymnastics fan or anything. I appreciate it, but I would like to know what's going on. And I still remember, I actually wrote this whole thing, screenshot it, and basically thanked Jay Billis. There was a Louisville game earlier this year where he was breaking down the sets and explaining it and really diagramming it. I'm like, this never happens. Doug Gottlieb, well, he doesn't call many games, but when he does, I mean, he's great at that. And besides that, there's really not many, and it's just, it's tough because, again, supply and demand. So it's just, how do you feel we can, or not we, but how do you feel X's and O's can get more into the mainstream? Because I think what's helped is that you have the support of so many national writers who really recognize the quality of work you're doing. The coaches, they really recognize the quality of work you're doing, and the ex-players, the current players, I'm sure. And I think that really helps because fans see that, they're going to be more interested. Somebody like me who's stuck in no man's land, who's not, I mean, a fan, but not really, but like the stuff I do isn't typical of fans. But I'm not an actual media person, so I don't really get, I mean, I'm not trying to complain. I just don't get support from either side. Like, and it was probably, I'll say this is probably way too honest. I mean, people listen to the podcast a lot. Like, I see the numbers, but when I put it on Twitter, I don't get I don't get the promotion. I don't get interaction. And when I put yours, I was really proud, happy to get you and to talk to you, and to see it didn't get really any of the interaction. I don't base everything on interaction, but I mean, that was embarrassing. So I'm just trying to find a way to make it more, I don't know, mainstream, I guess. How do you feel that's possible?
Yeah, well, if we want to get into sort of the business side of the podcast, I'd be happy to. I have found, as I think similarly, that people don't really listen to, or they don't really click on podcasts very much on Twitter. So like videos do quite a bit better in terms of like converting people to actually watch them. And really, when I first started doing this stuff, my big emphasis was going to be on the YouTube channel. I wanted to build up the YouTube channel, and I have since kind of pivoted to the actual like in tweet videos, those like little 2-minute ones, because they get even more engagement than the YouTube ones, and so I use the YouTube videos for longer deep dives that I really have been doing less and less as the season has gone on. And the plan is to hopefully pick those up a little bit, especially with March Madness. And I think that was when YouTube will be pretty valuable, is when you get all the people that are interested in the bracket. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I don't know. I think that's just sort of a problem with podcasts is that they don't do that well in the Twitter format for whatever reason. And then as for just X's and O's in general, yeah, you've mentioned Rob Doster a couple of times. I think he does a great job, and he knows the game really well. Yeah, I think one of the things is that it's like my advice for someone who wanted to do X's and O's or something like that would be to do the NBA and don't do college basketball.
I agree, and that's so sad.
Yeah.
To me.
Right, and it's not something that I ever really considered. Even I always say this: I like NBA basketball. As soon as college is over, I'll start watching it pretty heavily. But it's just people are trending to want X's and O's and analytics and advanced content. In the NBA, they like stuff that I'm not even really interested in. Everyone loves the CBA and the trades and the front office kind of stuff. I've actually heard that some NBA podcasts do better in the off season. It's almost not. I mean, it's a weird dynamic. The draft is another thing, but in general, they want that advanced content. The question is, when like Michigan is a really good team this year and their fan base is super devoted. But when I make a Michigan video, I'm not sure that anyone that isn't a Michigan fan is really watching it.
And yet, when you ask them name some of the best offensive coaches, everyone will say John Beilein, but nobody will actually know why. It's just because that's what you're supposed to say. I mean, that stuff like that just blows my mind.
Yeah, it does take a certain perspective to like Gibson Piper is the best at that. He watches so much film that I think he's good at answering some of those questions. But
yeah, best offensive coach Bob McKillop. Who does he coach? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there you go. So yeah, that it's like the fact that it's so heavily tied to fan bases in college. And yeah, it's been an interesting experiment. I don't like necessarily admitting that I am very cognizant of like the Twitter followers and the audience and the podcast numbers and all that stuff. It seems like that is almost self-promotional or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, I'm trying to make a business out of it, and it's important to be growing the Twitter following and all that kind of stuff. And so it's hard to give general advice because, I have the video, or I have the X's and O's stuff, I have the analytics stuff, and it's hard to draw like cause and effect for what does the best. But we are trying to, and we're monitoring that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even asking advice for myself. I mean, it is what it is with me. I'm more interested in the overall industry and trying to get people like you more noticed because, I mean, it's so important just to have that option for many people. And if it's not there, that's just it's really frustrating, at least to me. And I think obviously college basketball with the national, it's very different than the beat writers. So I think the beat writers have a lot of responsibility to really they have a lot of control over what goes on with their team and how their team is looked at. With like Duke, it's so odd because Duke is closed off and private. There's very few teams like, let's say, a Lon Kruger, Oklahoma, where it's open practices, which is just unheard of at this point. I mean, Duke, you only get information when they want you to. So I'm not quite sure how a Duke beat writer is supposed to give you any more information than what you already know besides a game recap. So that's why, like, I think it'd be great if there were more X's and O's because they're already paid for this. But it's not. I think with the newspapers are having a tough time. Whether you want to call newspapers in print or online, still the same. I mean, like Sean Crest, who's fantastic. It's not like he can have the time to break down Duke when he's covering every team in the triangle. He'll cover NC State, North Carolina, and Duke 3 games in one day. Then he'll cover like Carolina hockey. I mean, he's all over the place. He works his butt off. So when I say like I wish there was more X's and O's from beat writers, that's not an insult to them. I understand it's tough. So I mean, even there, I mean, when it's stretched thin. So I'm not really sure. I mean, it's tough to just even find a solution right now. The only thing I think that would help is, and I'm not trying to make this I'm not trying to go outside of sports too much. I'm just making a quick observation that when people have issues, they are much more likely to express them publicly, whether it's news, whether it's how something is, if it's somebody giving a ridiculous hot take on for sports, everyone's going to jump on the bandwagon of hate. But why not promote good? Why not promote quality? That's what I think could help. I mean, if somebody's doing a good job, shout them out, share, promote. I think that will help a lot more than just saying Jalen Rose said Zion Williamson is not going to be the greatest player of all time. He's stupid. He's horrible. He's evil. And I'm like, what, he said Zion's not going to be an MVP and you guys are melting down. Like, chill out. Like, there's things you can promote. I'm not even saying me. I'm not saying I deserve it. But promote what's good, not tear up what's bad all the time. And I am getting off my high horse right now.
Well, no, I agree, and it's probably something that once I'm done building this up this year, I would love to keep doing, or I'd love to pay it back going forward. I will say that, like you mentioned, that the national media guys have been really helpful, and that's an understatement. Jeff Goodman came on my podcast and has been amazingly supportive. And I talked to Sam Vecini before I even launched any of this stuff to kind of pick his brain. Rob Dosser's another one. I mean, really all of those guys, even some of the beat writers, have been really supportive of Hoop Vision. And yeah, I think that once you get to a certain level, you're at a point where you can then pay it back. And I'm not by any means there yet, but I'm hoping to do that in the future.
The Athletic, you guys have money. Please do video. Hey, hire Jordan. The Athletic, hire Jordan. Seth Davis, I'm talking to you. You'll never hear that. All right, so that basically sums up. Jordan, I kept you for a while. I think this was fantastic in terms of just giving a little inside look into your thought process, not just giving numbers, it's how the numbers come about, what you do. And, I mean, I would say I'm not sure even whether to bring up the Syracuse situation. I mean, there's been a Jim Boeheim. There's been a situation with him. How do you think that would affect it? You know what? You do video on that, so it really there's no way to actually base stats on whether or not stuff will be affected by a head coach possibly not being on the floor, or is there? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know too much about the situation, but or what the implications will be, whether he'll miss time or anything like that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't necessarily have an opinion one way or the other. Obviously, the human element does play a role in things, and I think that it could go either way in terms of just how when Zion goes out and it's either rallying around him or in shock against him, that it's probably out of my expertise.
I actually do find it interesting. Syracuse, I think, leads the ACC in forcing turnovers. That's the last thing I expected. They usually, I mean, they're great zone. I didn't think they force a lot of turnovers, but hey, good for them. So Duke will be traveling to Syracuse. Jordan, thank you so much, and please just tell everyone where they can find all of your quality material again.
Yeah, the Twitter account is HoopVision68. So is the YouTube channel. The podcast is Solving Basketball. And yeah, thank you so much for having me again, and I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, this was a marathon, and yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much, Jordan. Maybe sometime soon. Obviously, now I took a lot of your time now, but you're going to be doing great work as March Madness hits. Please check them out, and yeah, I will be talking to you soon.